Welcome to Books in Hindsight. I'm your host, Matthew Heines, and in this episode, podcasting, what could possibly go wrong? Coming up next, so stick around.
Welcome to Books in Hindsight, the only podcast where hindsight is always 2020. And we explore the great books, works, and ideas of the century. Now, here's your host, teacher, and author, Matthew Heines.
Hello, everybody. I'm Matthew Heines, and this is Books in Hindsight. Today's topic is going to be what can go wrong with your podcast. And as a fine example, we have none other than author Matthew Heines to tell us about his experience setting up a podcast. Welcome, Matthew. Hey, Matt. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on the show. It's been quite an interesting experience, and I'd like to really try to help out your listeners and explain to them just what is involved in setting up a podcast, and more important, just what can possibly go wrong. All right. Well, that sounds really interesting, Matt. So it's going to be a great show. Let's start off by finding out a little bit about you. So you are an author? Yes, Matt, I am an author. I have written 5 books, and I have chosen the self-publishing route because I don't like dealing with the fake media and the fake people involved in the publishing industry these days. And my books are actually about the truth, and you're not going to find that in too many bookstores these days, or on too many news shows or podcasts. But Matt, I'm sure we're going to find it here. Excuse me, I've got a feather or something. All right, so yeah, I am an author. I am a teacher. I've been in the Middle East for a long time. I taught in the United States for a long time, about 20 years total, and I have a master's degree in education and a bachelor's in history. Well, Matt, that's quite a resume you're sporting there, and I assume that your podcast is to educate. What's the podcast for? Well, Matt, that's a great question. The podcast was originally designed to help let me explain it like this. In the media world today, there are 6 multimedia companies that control all the information that you see. So I'm competing against billion-dollar multinational corporations that are very interested in you not hearing what I and many other authors have to say. So I said, well, why not have a podcast where authors like myself can come on and talk about their books and their ideas, even if they're not exactly mainstream, and see if we can't teach some people a little bit more about the world and about the people in it, and help these authors to sell some of their books and thus support these artists. Well, Matt, that sounds like a very, very noble idea. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? I mean, as an author, is that such a good idea to take the time to start a podcast? Well, that's another great question, Matt, and I just want to tell you that one thing that I saw when I started out with my books, I had come back from Saudi Arabia, so I didn't really have a lot of time working, or when I was working there, to promote my books here. So when I came back, well, of course, I wrote a book called The RAINIER, or actually wrote Killing Time in Saudi Arabia, about my experiences working for the Saudi National Guard in Riyadh. And after I published that book, I went on what you would call the book tour circuit, but what I found out that as a published author, you have to basically pay people to review your books, to get on podcasts, whatever, and it's very difficult. So, if you don't have a big budget, it's very difficult to get on podcasts. So what I found out is that when you publish a book, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to really tell you how great their product is and how much they're going to sell your book. But in the end, there's only one person that's going to sell your book, and that's you and the book itself. So I want authors to be able to have, this approach or this avenue. Now, I also want to add that, people charge me money to appear on their shows. And so, that is a great way to make money, I suppose. But really, it's not really ethical, and it certainly doesn't help starving artists to try to make money off of them. Well, okay, Matt, so that's an interesting take on things. Did you find any success with all of these steps that were recommended by other people? Limited, very limited success. I got, what I got out of it, I got reviews for my books, and I got myself on iTunes. And other than that, I it's been a few years. I haven't checked the reviews, but I just found out that the best way to talk about your books on a podcast, I think, is just to have a podcast. So I, didn't really start this to talk about my books, but if you have your own podcast and it's a good one, well, people are going to be more interested in your books. Well, I suppose that makes sense, Matt, but you're here now today because things with this podcast are not going as you wanted them to go. So do you want to start off there, or would you rather start at the beginning? Well, now that's a tough one. It's very tough to fix your hair here. I've got a little bit out of place, and I don't know if I can fix that. I think I'm making it worse. Anyway, how about that? All right. Yes, let's talk about a boot, as they say in Canada. Yeah, let's talk about why I'm here to begin with, but let's go back to the beginning. Now, I had decided to have a podcast. Matt, how long ago did you decide to have this podcast? Well, Matt, I had run for the United States Senate in Washington State this summer, and after the August primaries, in which I didn't win, I had a very limited budget, and we have a very crooked state. Wait a minute, you have a crooked state? You want to talk about that? Well, why don't we have another podcast and we could talk about my candidacy, and that way we don't really have to talk about that here. Hey, that sounds like a great idea, Matt. Why don't we have a podcast where we just talk about your candidacy for the Senate in Washington State, and then you can tell us about the corruption and whatever else that you experienced there. All right, Matt. Well, that sounds like a great idea. So let's go back to my initial experience in the podcast, and that was right in the month of August, maybe early September, when I said, I would really like to have a podcast, because I hear these guys on YouTube, and I say, I could do that, and I'd really like to meet some of these authors. So, and then all the other stuff that I talked about before, of course. So, all right, my wife said, let's go. Let's get it started, and let's get a podcast going. So that's what we did. The first thing that we did is we ordered this wonderful, this is an Audio-Technica mic, and this here is it is a pop filter, and I don't have my glasses on. I can't remember the name, but this Audio-Technica 2020 mic and this pop filter and this arm all came for $109, so it was the perfect time to get it. And I'll leave links in the description for this stuff. And I also got myself a Behringer amplifier, and so it is just great. I'll leave a link in the description for that as well. So suddenly I'm ready to go. Well, that's great, Matt. It sounds like you just got your stuff and you started podcasting, yes? Well, Matt, not exactly, because I ordered this microphone and this setup, and I guess it was a popular deal because I got my pop filter very quickly within 2 days. It took me 2 weeks to get this microphone from Amazon. 2 weeks, right? And I had free 2-day shipping, but that ended up being an extensive delay. So, when you're excited about stuff and you're waiting for that thing to go and let's get our guests. And I had initially talked to some people, and luckily I hadn't made any real firm commitments. So we got the microphone and we got ready to get set up. Okay, Matt, so you've got your microphone and you are going to start podcasting now, I assume. Well, no, it's not that easy, because let me just explain something. From the 2-week delay, even when I was setting up this microphone, if you look at these, there is no on-off switch. So what does that mean? It means that there's no way to turn it on. So what I did is I plugged it in, and on the amplifier, the lights came on. And so I said, great, it's on and all that. And then it didn't work. And I will just make a long story short. It took 2 hours just to figure out there is an on-off switch on the back of the amplifier. So that, and during this time you're going, oh boy, do I have to send it back? And now it's going to take a month to get this stuff. So very, very difficult and stressful. And that's just the beginning. So we got everything set up. We had the hardware set up. And then there's the process of you want to create a website, whatever. So we went on what is called Libsyn. Now, if you are a podcaster, you are going to know Libsyn, Libsyn, and I will leave a link in the description. But Libsyn is where you put your podcasts so that it can be relayed, I guess, out to all the other outlets like iTunes, Google, whatever their Google thing is, and so I wanted to be cool. I wanted to have my own Books in Heinessight page that it would be uploaded, which there is now, but initially I had bought my own domain, and when I tried to upload it, I couldn't. It just didn't work, and I don't want to go into the details about it. I had to go back and forth for a long time, like almost 2 days with Libsyn, 2 days with the host of my my website, and so it ended up being another nightmare. And the whole time you're going, is this going to work? And then after all that, we tried to upload you have thumbnails and you have a big photo that they want you to put in your Libsyn files. So if they want to broadcast you on YouTube. So we uploaded the small thumbnail, no problem. But the big one, the size that they said in their tutorial did not work. And there were a couple of things in their tutorial that just did not work. And so more aggravation, more headache. And, well, Matt, can I stop you there? I think I need to get a Kleenex out. I'm just about ready to break out into tears. This really sounds like a difficult experience. So during all this time, are you thinking about giving up? What's your thought process? Because this really doesn't sound like it's a very easy deal. Well, Matt, it wasn't an easy deal, but in the end, I thought, well, the end result is going to be I'm going to have a podcast, and it's going to be a great deal, right? It's, I could be potentially like coast to AM, coast to coast, or whatever those people are. And I can definitely be a conduit for authors to make money and to talk to people. So all this stuff was just, it was difficult. But to make a long story short, and to be quite honest, had I known then what was going to happen that would lead me sitting here, then I don't know if I would have continued on. Wow, Matt, that really does sound interesting. So let's just make sure we know where the audience knows where we are in case people came on late. So we're talking to Matthew Heines. He is an author. He's written 5 books, and he decided at some point that he wanted to start interviewing authors on his own website, and so on his own podcast. And so we're talking to Matt about he got his microphone. He got it 2 weeks late. The Libsyn software that he needs to use to upload his podcast, he had all kinds of trouble with that when he went to set up his own Books in Heinessight webpage in which you could plant the podcast. And is that website up right now? Yeah, it's up, Matt. I mean, it took a few days, but it was up within a few days, and it is up and running now. Books in Heinessight, and there are 5 podcasts on there right now if you want to go check them out. All right, so that's good. Now I think we've got everybody up to speed. So let's continue on with this saga of the podcast. So you've got your stuff, you got your microphones going, and you've got your stuff up on Libsyn, and what else is going on? Well, it depends on what you want to do and what your level of motivation is, but I wanted to not only be on like iTunes and my website for my podcast, I also wanted to be on YouTube. So if you want to be on YouTube, then of course you have to create a YouTube channel. So what this entails, just so people know, is that, and I want to just keep track here. So we have a Books in Heinessight website. This requires a header and, maintaining a website to a limited extent, but it does require that you make a header for it. Then we have a Books in Heinessight podcast or YouTube page. So you have to make a header for that. Books in Heinessight on Facebook, of course. So you have to have a header for that, right? And then you have to make posts. No Twitter. I just use my Heinessight Twitter page because I haven't figured out how to do multiple accounts. And when I ran for the Senate, they kept just, turning off my account. So I only have one. I only have Heinessight for my Twitter page, but I do have a Books in Heinessight Facebook page, channel, and YouTube channel, as well as Books in Heinessight website where you can go and watch the podcast. Also, the podcast is available on the second page of Books in Heinessight. Wow, well, that sounds like a lot of work. Like how many days can you tell us? Oh, I couldn't tell you. It's a lot of long 12-hour days, and you just have to keep going. I mean, if you want to get this going, to get this podcast going. Well, did you get? I mean, we're sitting here talking, and we'll talk about the circumstances behind that in a few minutes. But did you do any podcasts? Are there podcasts on your site right now? Well, sure, Matt. There's 5 podcasts. I basically just wanted to introduce myself. So I did one about whether or not to publish or self-publish or go the traditional route. And I gave people some caveats about self-publishing compared to regular publishing and vice versa. And then I did 4 where I talked about my individual books. So if you want to check those out, you can. Well, okay, so you've got 5 podcasts now, and what are the views? What's your success rate there? What's going on with that? Well, I'll tell you, it's not exactly great. Like I said, I'm doing a bunch of different things at the same time. Behind me, I have a green screen that is from my Deceptions of the Ages news channel, and this is also my recording studio for that. So I have a number of things going on. So I did my podcast, and then also I'm running for the Senate, and I am an author that sells books. So I have to, like I said, I did a makeover of all of my websites while I was setting up the YouTube podcast, etc., and the headers and whatever else. And I just redid everything. I mean, I redid my whole website. And here's a little side note, but while I was redoing my website, I happened to hit the wrong button, and after all this work I'd done, I deleted the entire first page. Oh boy, well, we all know how that goes. You do something, you spend a lot of time doing it, and it's gone. All right, kind of like being married in Texas, I guess. All right, so the next thing that we want to talk about is, I guess, if you want to get into this topic, Matt, but right now you're sitting here being interviewed on your own podcast. Now, how does that make you feel? Well, Matt, it doesn't make me feel good, but the fact of the matter is that along with all of the things that can go wrong, like microphones that don't show up, software that doesn't work, etc., etc., a lot of other things can go wrong. So if you'll just let me elaborate just for a few minutes, I'm just going to take you step by step through the last couple days. I found a wonderful guest and somebody that I had been trying to track down and to get onto my show for a long time. And I finally got her to agree to do it. And I was so excited. Problem was, I had assumed too many things. I assumed, number one, that I just had to turn on Skype and it would work. I assumed, number two, that the software that you just downloaded, this free software, and you turned it on and it would record the podcast, etc., etc. Number three, I assumed that my guest would have a decent microphone. And number four, I assumed that everything would go fine, and everything that I just talked about went completely wrong. And so, do you want me to go into like detail about each thing, or do you want me to just skim over some parts of it? Oh, no, Matt, we want to hear what exactly went on. I mean, we've got listeners out there that are going to maybe start their own podcasts, and they need to know what things that you ran into. Well, all right, let's start with the fact that I didn't know that Skype would not work. So what I just happened to be back on YouTube, and I'm watching a tutorial, and this guy says, oh yeah, you download the free version, because I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I record from Skype? And so this guy says, oh, you download this free version and it's no problem. So, okay, great. I'll download that free version and or the new version of Skype, and I'll be able to record. Well, that was when things went awry, because what happened is when you update Skype, it's through Microsoft. So what Microsoft wants to do is they want to sign you in to your basically Hotmail live whatever account. So when you're signing into that live account, you are not signing in to Skype. Now, I didn't know that, so I signed in, I got into Skype, and I initially started calling my wife in the next room on her computer, and it wouldn't even go through. And then I said, well, I don't have enough money in my account. So I added money to my account, but it didn't show up. And so then, I mean, now I'm starting to get very frustrated, because I have a guest that day, and I was just going to turn on Skype and get going. Well, actually, I was going to turn on Skype, download my stuff, and get going. Okay, so it took, I started at night because I wanted to be ready the next day. It took until like 11 to 12 o'clock the next day to figure out that when I was signing in to Microsoft, I was not signing in to Skype. So eventually we figured that out. So move on to problem number two. And problem number two was that I thought that you would just, as they show on YouTube, you download this software and it just records the screen. Okay, looks easy, not easy at all. And so while I have my guest on, and my guest is just very patient and sitting there waiting, and I'm going through, because I I have to explain this. I went on a tutorial and I saw something for record a screen for a Mac. So I went and I tried to get the free software, and that software was not free. It didn't work at all. So then I bought it. And after I bought it, it wasn't even the right software. And then it was a software for like recording the phone. So all this time I'm talking to my guest, right? And it's not. And so I'm going, why isn't this working? And so I finally had to tell my guest I'm going to go and try to figure this out. And what I figured out is that there's supposed to be one version, but there's like 16, 12 different software things that they offer. So then I downloaded the correct one, and remember, I'm paying for each one, and so now I'm up to $100, and then I get back on the with my guest, and I have basically what they've sent me is the free sample. It's when I look on the screen, when I look on the tutorials, and I see the free version and I see the pay version, I paid for $34 for the free version. And so now I have to try to get my money back from them. Okay, so this person that is waiting patiently says, well, why don't you just get a free version of this other software? And then again, it's the same story. It's not free. It doesn't work. And then I get it. And okay, so we go through the entire process of recording. And do you want me to continue with the story? Oh, by all means, Matt, keep going. This is so exciting. I can't wait to hear what happens. Okay, well, so we do the interview and say our goodbyes, thank you, and everything. And then I turn on the audio, and for her, there's nothing. And I mean, this is an amazing guest. She has an amazing story to tell, and I'm just going, oh, this is going to be so great. And then there's no audio. I mean, you look on the little audio editing track, and it's just a straight line. So what I had to do for an hour interview is I had to go through every line or every time she spoke, and I had to turn her volume to the max. And then I had to go at the same time and turn my volume all the way down, which if you see on, actually I had to, well, I'll get to that in a second. But so yeah, and I had to do that for my video, and I had to do that for the podcast as well. And when it was all said and done, she said, I don't like it. So the moral to the story there is, first of all, you have to make sure everything is working. Your Skype is working. Don't assume anything. Right, like an hour or two before you start, just check it. Of course, I should have had the software. I went to Ecamm, which I will put in a link in the description, which is a much better than what I'm recording on now. And I hope you can see a market improvement. And anyway, so where was I? Okay, so when my guest didn't have a proper microphone, and then my guest is a remote viewer. So without going into too much detail, we were trying to get targets for her to remote view and everything, and that's ended up taking so much time. And at the same time, I'm trying to get this stuff to work that I don't know how to work, and she's asking me to do all this stuff. And so it ended up, I had a horrible headache, and I just got very tired, and I basically just told her that, we're going to have to try this another day. And I think that probably I'm not going to be able to interview that guest again. I would like to, I really would, but I think that's probably the last that I'm going to see for her. So we'll just have to wait until my next guest comes on. But I do have a couple of very interesting people lined up for my podcast. Well, all right, Matt, let's hold on for a second. Let's wait on that. So holy cow. So you actually had a live person sitting there. Skype wouldn't work. Yeah, but Skype wouldn't. I mean, she wasn't there for the Skype adventure. That was kind of like a separate deal. She was only there to find out that me assuming that the software was going to be simple to use, like it says in the tutorial, was absolutely, out there, wrong. All right, Matt. And then she had you doing other stuff for the podcast it was for the podcast, but it was also kind of her personal deal too. So while I'm trying to figure everything out, then I just got put through all this other stuff to help her remote view targets because we were going to do an episode about that. But anyway, it didn't work out as we thought, and I probably lost a podcast guest there. So it'd be nice if she ever came back, but these things happen, and you just got to move on. Well, all right, Matt, it sounds like a kind of a sad breakup. Who do you have on the line next? Well, Matt, I have another actual remote viewer. She's also incredibly interesting, and I'm going to try to get her on within like the next week or so. And then I'm just going to be looking for authors. So if you are an author and you have an interesting story, I'm really looking for stuff in the, UFO, paranormal kind of field. But it doesn't matter. If you're an author and you would like to get on my podcast, then certainly contact me at greatbooks@heinessight.com, and we'll try to get you on the show. Well, come on, Matt. It's not like you're going to have any. You're having to turn people away, is it? Well, you don't know. Things might change. Yes, I guess they might. All right, Matt. Well, let's talk about what plans do you have for the future of the podcast? What plans do you have for the future of anything? Well, Matt, for the future of the podcast, it's pretty much right now, it's hit or miss. I mean, I know that it has a lot of potential, but I just don't know about, because it's required a lot of time. And if I get too many more guests, wait a minute, Matt, we don't know, where is this guest? We still haven't figured out why you're here. Oh, yeah. Well, why I'm here is it was kind of odd, but we were going to shoot, I shouldn't say shoot, we were going to do a segment today because after the first one we filmed, I didn't mention this, but I'd actually uploaded it to my Libsyn account, and I also uploaded it to YouTube. But, she didn't like it. Because her sound is so bad. And anyway, so I asked if she could meet me today or meet me online today, and we could try to shoot it again. And I don't think that she wants to do it anymore. So here I am. But yeah, we were going to shoot actually not one, but we were going to do 2 episodes. But wait a minute. Are you telling me you got turned down? Well, no, I didn't get turned down, Matt. I got stood up. There's a big difference. Oh my gosh, you're a podcaster and you got stood up by one of your podcastees, I guess. Well, I suppose so, Matt. If you want to put it that way and be insensitive about it, I guess you could say that I got stood up. Wow, well, maybe that's a podcasting first. I don't know, but it is certainly funny and it is certainly interesting. Well, wait a minute, Matt. Let me point out we're not dating here. We're just doing a podcast. So things happen. This happens all the time. People have appointments they cancel. You got to understand this. Well, did she tell you she wasn't going to come or anything? Well, no, she just said she was going to be online today and we'd finish. But, anything could have happened. All right. So you got stood up. Okay. That has got to be the funniest thing I've heard in podcasting history. All right. Well, hold on there. I didn't get stood up. I'm married. I'm just doing a podcast. Yeah, but come on. She was going to do the podcast and then she's not, this, is not a normal thing. You got stood up. Okay, you got to face the music here. It doesn't matter if you're like not dating or anything. When somebody says they're going to do something and they don't show up, then that means you, my friend, got stood up. All right, Matt, if you're going to put it like that, I guess. I don't want it's your podcast, so I'll just let you have your fun. All right, well, you need to know anything more from me? Any more questions? How much longer do I have to sit here and listen to this grueling grilling? Well, Matt, not much longer. I just want to tell the people out there that your podcast is going to be once a month, right? No, Matt, it's once a week, and we could actually do more. But I also have my Deceptions of the Ages news channel, and I also do other things like stand-up comedy, and I am running for the Senate. So I guess we're going to talk about the Senate thing in the next podcast. Yeah, Matt, let's do that. That sounds like a good idea. Let's say goodbye to the folks now, and let's see each other for the podcast. But before we stop, I think we've got about 5 minutes. Could you just very quickly go over some of the things that, for people that are going to start a podcast, just reiterate some of the things that they have to watch out for, just for my viewers' benefit? Oh, sure, Matt. I'd be glad to do it. All right, let's start off with the equipment. I talked about how I didn't have a very good mic, and you see how well I sound now. For a long time, I was using a blue snowball, white snowball, whatever you call those things, and that was fine, but it just didn't give me the kind of high quality iPod sound or podcast sound, that you get from having a microphone like this. So that's the first thing I have to tell you. And, don't plan anything until you've got all of your equipment in and you've got it turned on and you know it's working. And then, of course, I don't need to say too much more about make sure that your Skype is working, make sure that I'm using Ecamm software, which I will leave a link in the description. I wouldn't waste my time on anything else if I were you. And when it comes to your guests, I would just have a couple of things. Now, the first thing is you have to be ready to go. And I felt so terrible that, I'm a very organized person, and I kept telling my guest, no, well, let's go, let's get it done, and let's get it done and move on and go on to other things. And I tried to go so quickly, and I just assumed everything would work, that I ended up basically probably losing a guest. Now, when you're in your relationship with your guest, unless you want to get involved in people's lives and everything else, which I'm not saying is bad, but you can really get distracted. I learned that the best thing to do, have a time for the podcast, maybe get on 10 minutes before, do the podcast, and finish it. And if you make any plans to do more than one podcast, you really have to, ask that person to be punctual and whatever else, because if you schedule this and these things take a long time, the setup takes a long time, and then they don't show up, then where are you? So you have to be very careful about that. When you are buying your software, I would only use Ecamm. I've had this A-Power stuff, and I don't even know what it was. Of course, make sure your Skype works. Make sure you go through Skype settings and make sure it's the microphone that you're using that is in the setup. Also, you do that in whatever software you're using. And, depending on how you're going to edit it, et cetera, you've got to be well enough first in how to use it to know how to use it. There's no better way to say that. So that is all that I can tell you. You be prepared, and I will tell you this, and I have published books, I've been in the military, I've been when I ran for the Senate, that really was physically grueling, but this was a mental, I mean, it's just been a nightmare. And then when it culminated with having a guest sitting there and this stuff is still not working, it's very tough and it's very stressful. And so, I probably lost a guest because of this, and a guest that I really wanted. So anyway, as I said, these things happen, and we will just move on and make a great podcast. Well, okay, Matt. Well, that sounds like some really interesting advice, and we are certainly looking forward to more episodes. And I hope that you can get this guest back. You've really built her up to be interesting, and the other one that you talked about certainly sounds interesting. So good luck with all of that. And I guess we are going to talk to you in our next segment about there's about 3 weeks until the Senate primaries, and we want to hear what your strategy is for getting into the United States government. I shouldn't say government, I guess the United States legislature. Okay, Matt, well, thanks for your time, and we'll see you next time. And for everybody else out there, we will say goodbye, everybody, and please join us for our next podcast on Books in Hindsight. And please don't forget to subscribe to our Books in Hindsight channel on YouTube, and please donate on Patreon. You can get a subscription for as low as $3, lieutenant grade subscription, $3 a month, and you'll get some cool stuff. All right, well, it's been nice meeting with you all, and certainly, Matt, it's been nice talking to you, as usual. All right, well, this is Books in Hindsight, and keep reading.
This has been Books in Hindsight with your host, Matthew Heines. Please join us for our next podcast and look for our archives on iTunes and go to thehindsight.com. That's HEINES site.com for great books by Matthew Heines and other great authors.